Hello students, Michael Sanchez here. Thank you so much for watching. Today's a really special day. We have another violin instructor that's joining us on today's call. Every Thursday at 9 o'clock we've been doing these classes, and it's going to be great for us to get another opinion from another instructor. It's going to be interesting, just the different methodologies that we both teach, and I'm sure that you guys will learn a lot from today's class. So let's introduce the instructor. His name is Stephen McMillan. He's an instructor down in Texas. How are you doing, Stephen? Oh, let me quick unmute you there. There you go. How you doing, Stephen?
I'm very, very good.
So
we have beautiful weather here for unusually beautiful weather.
Tell us a little bit about your studio and your profession of teaching violin.
Well, I see students at a couple of studios here in the Houston area, and a few of my students come to see me when I'm on tour also in other locations. In Texas, and traveled throughout the southern United States and performed with a number of orchestras. And I just walked in the door, as a matter of fact, from seeing some of my private students in the Houston area here, and saw your notice on Facebook, and I thought, well, I might as well join you tonight.
Appreciate it. So yeah, I'll kind of start us off a little bit, Stephen, as far as some important things to talk about. So we're going to talk about the bow hold today. So the number one thing that I definitely want to first cover is just the importance of the bow hold. So most students sometimes don't understand as far as how important it is to hold the bow properly. The things that cause bad sound on the violin, when you get squeak sounds, bounce sounds, stuff that I'm sure you don't want to have when you play violin, most of the time is caused by the bow hold or using improper muscles when you're guiding the bow. So, but it all kind of starts, right here as far as the bow hold. So as you guys can see, my fingers are really curved. It's really important for the bow hold hand to be really relaxed when you're playing. So what I'm going to do is actually demonstrate kind of how this should look. So if you guys see my hand, right now it's at my side, extremely relaxed. If I just kind of let my hand drop and not flex any muscles, just like this, this is my natural hand when I'm just as relaxed as can be. But if you notice, when I put the bow into my hand, it's very similar to my most relaxed state of my hand when it's to my side. So that's kind of how you want to hold the bow. You don't want to have your fingers straight like this. So my fingers are not straight to my side when I'm most relaxed. They're naturally curved. So that's definitely something important. I always teach first to students. Fingers curved. As you can see, my pinky is curved. It's right on top of the button. A lot of times I see students like this when they're holding the bow. This promotes the hand kind of guiding too much like up here as far as guiding the bow here, where we don't want that. We want to guide the bow more at this point, and we want the hand more on top of the bow. This allows us to keep the bow as flexible as possible, as relaxed as possible, and get a good sound. Also notice my thumb is curved. Very important, and it's right in this groove. That's where I'm placing it. And then notice how far my index is over the stick. So I see a lot of times students are like here, which promotes a little bit of tension. You want to be more over the top, like that. So that's kind of how I first teach it. There's definitely more that can be said, but let's go back and forth a little bit. Stephen, what's kind of your thoughts on some of those tips I just said as far as the bow hold?
I concur with everything you said. The student has to become pretty self-aware about the flexibility in their fingers and not overstraining to hold the bow. I noticed that when we begin any new activity, a physical activity, whether it's lifting weights or just holding the bow, which amounts to I think a really heavy bow for the violin would be about 65 grams, which is really nothing when you consider that the weight of your coffee cup is probably 3 times that. But what we tend to do in a new experience is we over grip sometimes. And so holding the bow straight up and down is a good way to check to see how relaxed you can, how loosely you can hold the bow before you turn it over. And I notice some people have a good deal of problem keeping a curve in the little finger when they first begin. And so just easing into that resistance by tipping the bow over a little at a time before you go, you know, fully horizontal with the bow, to build up with that. Some people even do this little push-up exercise to make sure that the finger functions properly. And it's, I don't know if it actually builds strength, but it certainly builds some confidence in keeping your grip loose and functional at the same time.
Very good. Yeah, that's actually a really, really good drill, guys. I call it the pinky drill, what Steven's doing. That's basically working on flexibility in the pinky, because a lot of times students are very stiff here, and it really causes tension up against the bow. So that's actually a really great drill. So if you guys can see how it's being done here, I'm kind of starting off here straight, and then kind of the bow is being brought up by me stiffening my pinky. But basically what I'm doing is I'm building flexibility here. And one thing that flexibility does is it allows you to play really well at the frog, which a lot of beginners are not going to really play at the frog, but eventually it causes a lot of good sound when you're playing at the frog. On 1 second there, I'm going to mute. There we go. So it's really important to have a flexible pinky for that purpose, but also just to prevent tension up against the bow, which causes bad sound. So it's a really good point what Steven was talking about with the pinky. One tip for you guys. A lot of times I see students try to do their bow hold just like I'm doing right now in the air, which works if you're holding it properly. But I find that the best way to adjust a bow hold, especially for beginners, is to do it on the instrument itself. Because right now the violin is supporting the bow for me. So now I can kind of be more relaxed in how I'm adjusting my fingers because I have the support of the instrument. A lot of times though, when students are doing this, they're kind of holding the bow up in the air. They're kind of forced to hold the bow as well on top of everything else, which kind of builds bad habit of gripping the bow too tight, because we don't want to grip the bow too tight. We want it as loose as possible. So what I always tell students is, you know, the violin is literally holding the bow for you. If you put it in one certain spot, it's actually going to totally balance. I'm really bad doing this, but there we go. So literally all you have to do is take your finger and you have to guide the bow along. There's no need to grab it too tight, which is a really bad habit. But for you to actually adjust the bow while it's on the instrument is a really good habit, because it allows you to be more relaxed while adjusting things. So any other tips, Steven, as far as the bow hold that you would suggest to students?
Well, in general, teaching the proper contact with the string, it's a good idea, and I think the Suzuki program's quite emphatic about it. It's a good idea to start with the arm. I don't know if you can see there, but I'm going to adjust this a little bit. It's a good idea to start with the arm in a right angle position, so that essentially we're approaching the center of the bow to begin with. And we learn a lot of good habits in bowing technique by moving only at the very beginning from the center of the bow out to toward the tip, and then back again to the center, leaving the arm in that square position. And one of the things that we avoid by adhering to this little discipline at first is going too soon into the frog area of the bow, which is a more complex physical movement. And so there's a little bit of awareness and knowledge that one should already have if they're going to operate properly toward the frog. And so it's a way of getting a flow and a good tone and contact with the string before we get into more complex movements of the arm.
Very good, very good. Well, for right now, I'd like to take some questions from the audience. If anybody has a question, feel free to raise your hand, and anybody that's currently here can ask questions. So feel free to also pose your question in the chat. And please, if you guys can, try to be muted if you're not actually actively speaking. That would be great. Does anybody have any questions? Guy, yes.
Good evening, everybody. My question is there a specific, knowing that there are so many different people out there, is there a specific method that's preferred over other methods based upon age, based upon, you know, whatever the potential factors might be? I know there's just thousands of different factors, or not millions, but I'm getting the impression that Stephen kind of favors more of the Suzuki method, as opposed to, you know, you and I, Michael, are working on, you know, essential elements. There's this O'Connor method that I am kind of finding of interest, versus so many different methodologies out there just to work and learn the violin. Is there a particular one? How do you guys go about finding out what's best for the student and how that's going to work within your lessons?
Stephen, go ahead. You can take that one first.
Well, I use a number of approaches, and it just depends on the level that the student is at. I know that the Suzuki method, properly applied, can work miracles, seemingly. It is also an extremely, you know, the parent has to be, if one does the true Suzuki method, the parent has to be more disciplined than the child. Mm-hmm. And that involves the parent coming in for a period of time, maybe 6 weeks or even several months of instrumental lessons themselves, and they begin to practice the instrument at home without ever mentioning to the child that this is going to be something for them. And so there's a great deal of reinforcement and imitation of the parent involved. Not everyone is willing to go to that length, but the reason I bring up the Suzuki method is because there are a number of methodologies which are very useful regardless of what approach you're taking, whether it's old-fashioned European traditional or whether it's folk style. If you break down what you're doing into very, very specific tasks, and then you stage them, taking one task and only adding 1 or 2 other tasks to it while reinforcing the first one, it's just a very reliable approach. And this is, you know, this is not patented by Suzuki. This is any educator would tell you that drilling the old stuff while adding a few new things is a very effective approach to education.
Very good. Yeah, I'll give some of my thoughts on that. Basically, what I think is that the most important thing when you're learning violin is that you're not doing things that are too hard or too easy for you. You're just doing things that are just right. And what's important is that you're also doing the 3 things that I've talked about recently quite a bit: scales, etudes, or etudes as most people say, as I say etudes, and a performance piece. So I'll kind of relate it to lifting weights. So some of you guys at some point in your lives have tried to lift weights. Basically, there's different ways to get stronger. You know, you can lift, you know, free weights, you can lift machine weights, and it's all going to help you towards that ultimate purpose of getting stronger. The same kind of concept, I think, applies in the violin. As, excuse me, guys, if you guys could try to mute as you're in the class, that would be great. Thank you. I think it applies very similarly as far as working out to playing the violin, as there's different methods that you can use. So for example, there's pieces in Suzuki that are a certain level that are obviously more beginner. There's pieces in essential elements that are a certain level that are going to be similar. But there's a lot of different books out there that can kind of serve the same purpose of satisfying, you know, a performance piece, or satisfying scales, satisfying etudes. So you just have to find, you know, a certain combination that your teacher's comfortable with or that you're comfortable with. but you want to make sure that it's right at the level that you're at. You don't want to be doing something that's really hard, way over your head, or something that's way too easy to where you're just breezing through it. You just have to have just enough to where you're going to get stronger, or in violin case, get better. So what's your thoughts on that, Stephen, as far as you know, the level of, you know, material that you're doing when you're practicing or playing?
Well, you're exactly right. One has to have certain things that are being reinforced or repeated as basic technologies that are applied to all tone production and intonation. But getting stuck in one place is not a great thing, not for children, and especially not for adults, you know. Doing the same thing for too long. The one thing I would point out in the Suzuki method is a lot of people, they look at the achievement as being based on which book are you in and what number in the book. And that can sometimes be a little bit misleading. If one studies that method carefully, they come to learn that while the technique of playing the violin is being taught with familiar tunes and traditional pieces of music, what he's done is he's very carefully assembled a trajectory that really teaches bowing techniques. They're essentially bowing exercises. So it all comes back to, and you've talked about this many times, it comes back to tone production and how we make the bow contact the string. Until these things are firmly developed, we don't really develop a true, how should I say, a real heart to the sound until we're really firm with the idea that the bow has to come first, and the other things can only be judged in their accuracy. You can't develop really fine intonation until you have a really solid tone production to test that out on.
Absolutely. Very good points. One thing I'll add to that, you know, just to give you guys kind of a perspective of what you should be doing, what you should be working to. There's quite a few different elements of music. So a lot of you guys are very familiar with the first element, which is notes. Notes is obviously, you know, different key signatures that you play on the violin. So G major, C major, D major. Obviously, when you're first learning, the goal is to learn one key signature at a time. So a lot of these books like Essential Elements, Suzuki, they're kind of progressively teaching you different key signatures. So when you're first starting out, you don't want to just be dumped with all the key signatures. You want to progressively learn one and then the next one. The other element of music that's really important to progressively learn is rhythm. So, you know, you start off by learning eighth notes and quarter notes. Then you learn, then you have half notes, and then you have dotted quarter notes and dotted half notes. But you don't want to just be dumped everything at once as you're first learning. You have to progressively learn those things, and that's the best way to learn. In these books, like Essential Elements, Suzuki, they're kind of set up that way, to where it's giving you just a little bit at a time something new as far as notes, as far as rhythm. The next element of music that I'll talk about is what's called articulation. It's kind of a fancy word, but basically articulation is different things that are in music on top of the notes and the rhythm that make it sound a certain way. For example, staccato is an element of articulation. So playing short instead of playing long is something that's added in music that's important to learn. Another element of music is accents. So a note is not just played normal, but it's played more emphasized by pulling the bow quicker. These are things that you learn as you progressively learn, and it makes music sound more musical. There's quite a few different articulations on top of those two. I just named a couple. The fourth one is dynamics. Dynamics is basically how loud you play music. So you have obviously your fortes, your loud, your piano is played really soft. And that's stuff that you want to put into music as you progress because it makes it sound that much better. More advanced elements of dynamics are crescendos, are diminuendos. That's basically like getting gradually softer or gradually louder. So those are things that you learn when you start to progress in the violin, and adds to your music. Another one, there's two more, is what I call interpretation. Interpretation is basically how you interpret the piece. So how much vibrato you put into the piece, how you sing the piece. You know, do you just play the notes, or are you getting into it? You know, it's kind of like hearing a singer sing. Are they just singing the notes, or are they actually expressively singing the notes? That's expression, interpretation. And the last one is tempo. So are you playing the piece, you know, you start off really slow, but then are you gradually getting faster, 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 faster? We don't want to do that. You want to keep the entire piece in tempo. So that's the sixth element of music. So a quick recap on those. Notes, rhythm, articulation, dynamics, interpretation, and tempo. So when if you were to go to an audition and get auditioned, and this actually applies to all music, not just violin, you would get judged on those elements of music. Most students just think it's notes and rhythm, but it's so much more. So if you guys have any questions about that, please feel free to ask me, but that's definitely an important thing to know and to understand as you progress. Stephen, thoughts?
Yes, I mean, all of those are right on. I will say in professional symphony auditions, there is, it's been the practice in many situations that in hearing so many qualified players, and we're talking about a single position attracting 300 to 500 applicants, all of whom are really spectacular musicians. So the first round is generally quite mechanical. After resumes are considered and there's that first cut, then among those who actually show up at the audition and have the nerve to go through with it, the second cut is just to hear a round of more technical pieces. And I'm sorry to say that at that professional level, if there's one single flaw in any of the intonation or the rhythm, especially the rhythm, but if there's any flaw at all, they're just cut from the next round. And this is not because they wouldn't perhaps even be the most perfect candidate for the job. It's just a way of culling the numbers down to something that they can handle and get done in a couple of days of intensive listening and selecting. So there is an unfortunate emphasis on absolute accuracy at that first round, but after that, all of the other elements are extremely important. The sensitivity to the music and a knowledge of how that music, the stylistic qualities of the music, how that should be played. I appreciate your talk about articulation, and if I could just offer one little, I will call it a shortcut, although I hate defining anything as a shortcut, but if you're exploring your tone production, and if you can just remember one little trick, I'll call it, is when you launch the bow, when you start the bow moving across the string, don't be half-hearted about it. The bow is either moving or it is not moving. So let's get a good start, and then learn a little trick. If you're only practicing the starts to your notes, learn a little trick, which is to taper off, let the bow coast to a stop, so that the tone begins abruptly and then fades away. And then prepare your fingers on the bow and do the same thing. And what it reminds me of is the ringing of a bell, which is, for human beings, this is probably one of the most ancient musical sounds that we're familiar with. And much like the sound of a single key on a piano or a bell or a chime, this the sound has most of its energy at the initial strike, and then it fades gently away. And for some reason, human beings find this quality in a musical tone very, very pleasing. And so if your playing does quite the opposite, if you continue to grind into the bow to the end of your notes, you understand that it's not a very pleasant quality. So though we have to practice sustaining our notes, that is a skill we have to learn. You'll do yourself a favor if you learn how to strike the tone with clarity at the beginning and fade away from it naturally. And if you do this for one day and make this a little habit, all of the people who have to listen to you practice will suddenly start saying, "You sound really good today. Something's different."
That's great. That's great. Yeah, some great tips there, Stephen. Really appreciate you joining us today. Hopefully you'll be with us again. Next week we've been doing these classes every Thursday. I think my last thing I'll say, just about everything we talked about, is just really pay attention to the music, not just the notes and the rhythm. Pay attention to everything else that's in it, because it can be done really well. Your song can sound that much better when you're paying attention to all the details. So that's my last bit of advice for you guys. Thanks for joining us. Next week we'll be talking some more about some violin things and giving you guys some more tips. For right now, we're going to be taking more questions from the audience. And for those of you guys that are interested in joining us, next week will be another class Thursday at 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Thanks so much for watching.